So my name is Dennis Gill with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is for March 2022, and I am in Northern Virginia. I have the pleasure of interviewing C.J. Buche. Will you just tell me a little bit about yourself, ma'am? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? That kind
Sure.
of thing.
I grew up in the South, in Memphis, Tennessee.
Did you go to high school down there?
I did.
Okay.
High school and college.
Okay. Where'd you graduate from college?
University of Memphis.
Okay.
It was Memphis State University
Right.
then. So.
Okay. And you were in the military? What branch of service?
I was in the Army. I was a signal officer, but I had a number of non-traditional kinds of jobs.
Right. And how long did you serve?
I served for 20 years.
20 years. So you're retired.
I am.
Okay. And you were a signal officer?
I was.
What does that mean?
It is communications. I worked with radios. My first duty station, I worked with what is now considered email. Back then it was electronic messages from headquarters to headquarters.
Okay. Why did you decide to join the Army?
They offered to pay for some of my schooling,
Right.
and that was a good deal at the time.
Right. Did you have any idea what you wanted to do in the military? You just kind of...
I didn't really. There were a couple of branches that appealed to me. Signal is where I ended up.
Okay. Did you ever deploy to a forward location or during wartime?
I did. I deployed to Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm
Okay.
in 1991. I was a company commander with the 101st Airborne Division Air Assault.
Okay, and what did you do? What does that mean? You're the company commander.
Company commander, I had a headquarters company,
Okay.
and so I provided for the care and feeding of a number of people. Very few who actually worked directly for me because it was a headquarters company.
We are here specifically to talk about the flower ceremony from last November 2021. What was your involvement in that?
My husband is the executive director of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier Foundation,
Okay.
and I served as a volunteer. I helped with some of the logistics, the setup. When the flowers got delivered, I was part of the crew that got them so that they were opened and ready to go, the ones that we provided. Most of my time during the event, I spent a lot of time providing transportation for the volunteers who were there handing out flowers. And so I was driving from the tomb area down to the front gate and back again. And then in between during the shifts, I was at the table passing out flowers and helping to replenish the flowers and things like that.
Okay. Tell us about that day. What were your observations on what you saw?
Learned a lot about flowers that day, the day before. It was an incredible experience to be there and to see the wide base of people that came. There were people in very, very dressed up. You know, they were dressed up like you would go to a wedding and be the bride or the groom. There were people who showed up in their jeans and t-shirts. So it was a real cross-section of who was there and where they were from, what their backgrounds were. There were many military members that came through the line and laid a wreath. There were any number of spouses, moms, dads, grandmas, but there were also U.S. citizens who wanted to honor the memory of someone they knew or the memory of soldiers that they didn't know. And it is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Soldier gets used as a generic in the American lexicon. If you've ever served, you would say soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and I believe now Guardians for the Space Force. But, you know, we had the Chief of Staff of the Air Force came through. We recognized him. He's a visible figure. And there were innumerable people that came through that just somebody. And as we asked them, as we were talking to them, you know, what brought you here today? Well, I was visiting my son's grave and I heard this was going on. Or I heard this was going to happen and I drove from, you know, pick a state. People had driven for 2 days to get there. We had one volunteer who drove from Tennessee so that she could be part of passing out flowers with us.
Why do you think that is? What struck a nerve with people?
For some of them, there's a connect. For a lot of people, there's a connection of some type, whether it's they have someone buried in Arlington, they are related to a service member. It was interesting to hear from the people who didn't have that particular sort of connection. You know, what was it that brought you? I wanted to do this because it was something that was important to me. And there was no particular reason that stood out among those people other than it was a desire to show honor and to recognize the sacrifices of service members represented by those who are buried at the tomb.
Right. And do you think that's why the tomb is still important, still relevant today, 100 years later?
You've probably heard this quote a couple of times in these interviews, so if someone is watching this and they hear several of them, Richard Azaro, who is one of the members of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier Foundation and was a sentinel at the tomb, said, "When people leave, you can see that they are changed." Now, that's not a direct quote, but it is always amazing to me when I go to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It has not been so much during the pandemic, but when they do honor flights where they bring World War II veterans or Korean War veterans to see their memorial in Washington, D.C., quite often there's a trip to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And there will be 15, 20 people standing around and several gentlemen, it tends to be gentlemen based on when we've allowed women to be in the service, in wheelchairs. And when the tomb guard announces that for the changing of the guard, you are to remain silent and standing, and the rest of the crowd starts to stand up, those gentlemen from their wheelchairs will try to stand up. Some of them make it, some of them don't. And someone will usually, their caregiver will usually kind of tap them and say, "It's okay for you to be seated." But for them to make that effort, that's what the tomb means.
Right.
For me, every time I stand there, I've got tears in my eyes.
You think, and I'm going to ask you to speculate here, for those of us that have served in the military, it's sometimes you don't recognize that there really aren't that many people that do serve. When you break, in this area we're kind of spoiled because everybody seems to be military. But you go to the heartland of America and you might not run across a whole lot of veterans. Mm-hmm. You think the flower ceremony in particular is a small way that people can serve? Because they're going there to honor the tomb, honor the person or the people that it represents. You think in a small way it's their way of doing what they can to serve?
It is.
Those that haven't served.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of emotion for a lot of people around thank you for your service, right, both from the giver and the recipient. And so some people say, that's nothing. They need to do more for veterans. Some people say, I am grateful for everyone that is grateful for me. Thank you for your service is what some people can do. That may be all that they can do. Some of those same folks said, this is something else I can do. I can go myself. I can take my time and my money resources to pay for the travel, and I can go to D.C. and do this. And I think that's what prompted some of them, is that maybe they didn't serve because they were unable to do so for whatever reason. There was a physical issue, or there was a timing issue, or whatever it was. And they may feel guilty because a friend did serve.
Right.
And so this is something that they could do.
Right. What were your observations of the military personnel that were there working the event, in particular the Sentinels? Because it was a little bit different experience for them, obviously, because people don't generally come up that close to the tomb.
Right. The Sentinels were, as always, very professional. I think I cannot speak for them. My best guess is that they were on a more heightened alert status. Alert, and I'm saying that badly. I think there was a heightened sense of observation of what the crowd was doing, because the crowd was somewhere that they are not normally. But I think the tomb guards appreciated it, to be able to see that from the public. I didn't really get a chance to talk to them during the event. Obviously, the ones that were on the plaza at the time, I couldn't talk to, and I really didn't get a chance to talk to them when they were off duty. But talking to former Sentinels who we interacted with subsequently, there were a number of comments from them and from other people about the banking of the flowers, because periodically, as the public would lay the flowers, they would get to a point where they were kind of unwieldy, and they would be moved. They would pause the line for a few moments, and they would distribute them around the tomb. And the picture at the end of the second day, there was one just at dusk that was just incredible. And then to see the next day, on Veterans Day, when President Biden came and laid a wreath there, to see all those flowers wrapped around the tomb.
You can go on YouTube and watch the videos or talk to some of the Sentinels. There's times where people are not quite as behaved as they ought to be. Did you see any of that those 2 days, or were people on their best behavior?
I did not see any of that. As much as there was variation in the way people acted and where they came from and how they dressed, they were universally respectful, subdued as they got closer to the tomb. In the line, there was joking and kind of milling around and laughing and things like that. But the closer they got to the plaza, to where they were going to lay the flower, it got quieter and more still. And everyone was grateful that it was happening. The biggest complaint was, why can't it be longer? We got a number of, is this going to happen next year? It's a huge undertaking for everybody involved, and not the least of which is the staff of Arlington Cemetery, who dealt with that volume of visitors.
Yeah. And that leads me to my next question. Clearly, every year might not be appropriate, but would you like to see this happen more often, more than every 100 years, maybe?
Certainly more than every 100, and not every year. I'm not sure where the best balance is there. It is always going to be a significant event to visit the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, but I'm not sure that every year doesn't make it a bit too much.
Why do you think the tomb still matters? Why should we still be recognizing that unknown soldier from, well, there's more than one, but the original from 100 years ago? Why does that still matter to people, or why should it matter to people?
It is unlikely that there will be unknowns anymore. The Vietnam War unknown was disinterred because there was a reasonable belief of who it was. They did DNA testing and were able to find Lieutenant Blasey and then bury him in his home state. But that representation of everyone who has sacrificed and to a large extent who has served. There aren't very many moms or brothers or sisters left who were could possibly be related to the remains that are interred there. But they are representative of every service member who has died on the field of battle, or for that matter, who has died in training, who has died while in service to this country.
Given that, and given your observations from that day, do you think the flower ceremony served its ultimate purpose?
I think it was an incredible recognition of the 100th anniversary. I think it brought attention to the tomb, which brings attention to service members. And that maybe when people now offer that, thank you for your service, there's a little more, it's a little more than just a rote, oh, there's somebody in uniform, thank you for your service. It's a little more, there's a little more behind it, a little more understanding behind it. There was national news coverage on most of the major networks, I think. We were in the cemetery, so I didn't get a chance to watch those, but I am told that those were there. It's important not to just recognize it at Veterans Day and Memorial Day, but that it's March the 4th, 2022. There are soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, there are service members around the world in harm's way right now as we sit here. They will not be home for their child's birthday. They won't be home for their anniversary. Maybe they won't be home for July 4th or what, or for a parent's passing. They may not make it back for that because they said, I will go.
In addition to what we're doing here, how do we keep that day from fading in people's memories? How do we keep that alive?
I'm not sure we need to keep that particular day. I think what we need to keep is that spirit of service and sacrifice for others. That not only I don't just do for me what I do. I do it for my neighbor. I do it for my friend in California. I do it for the United States. In some cases, I'm doing it for the citizens of another country. Democracy is not the greatest system in the world, but it is the best thing we have got going. And it's better than everything else. And so for young people, the vast number of them, young people, to say, I will do this, is to me an amazing thing.
There's been times when we as a nation have not recognized the service, especially of combat veterans who went and did a job that they were told to do. Do you think that's changed, that we do a pretty good job now as a society in recognizing and honoring those who have served, who are willing, like you said, to be gone for holidays and birthdays and sometimes never come back?
I think we do much better than we did after Vietnam. I think there are still instances where the bureaucracy of it all gets the better of smaller groups or maybe larger groups. But we have certainly, Desert Storm turned a corner, I think, for a lot of people because there were Vietnam veterans who had been spat upon, who had not been welcomed home, who were welcomed home. I saw some of that personally where Vietnam veterans saw the flags on all the overpasses and all that after Desert Storm, and it meant so much to them because it was so incredibly different from when they had come home before and been told, don't wear your uniform. So I think we as a nation, as a whole, I think we do pretty well. But I think there are a number of bureaucratic ways we could do better.
I have one last question, and this is one of those questions that's kind of hard to answer sometimes. Someone's going to watch this interview, not only yours, but all these interviews that we're doing, I don't know, 50 years or 100 years down the road maybe. What message would you like to send that person, not only about the flower ceremony, but just about service in general?
Whether you have served yourself or whether you supported those who did serve, remember that service is what is important. what you do matters. Honor that willingness to do what others will not or cannot do. Don't ever forget that 100 years from now, when someone is watching this, it is very likely that some service member is in a cold, wet, dark place away from their families because they said yes. Thank them for it.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for sitting down and sharing with us your experiences. And as you just mentioned, I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.